Hey y'all, this is Luke with GlockHistory.com, here to do a long version of what generation is my Glock. I did a short version, you guys may have seen it, had just gens 1 through 5, and I promised to do this in-depth review. So up on the wall here you got 30 different model variants, and this kind of becomes like the history of Glock along the way. So we'll get right into it. Start with the Gen 1 design changes. What you're looking at here is actually an AC prefix model 17, and sorry about the lighting. If you can tell, the slide on it is a little bit green tint and the barrel is just a stainless. They didn't parkerize it. This is the earliest version of the Glock 17. Now, this would have run all the way from the AA prefix to probably the AD prefix on the Gen 1 17s. But at the same time, this all-black version was being produced along the same serial number ranges. So this is actually an AA prefix 17, even though it looks like the newer design from the AC. It's all black, barrel is black as well, and you'll see those mixed and matched between AA and AD. And with the AE prefix, they landed on this all-black design. That was actually the first one prior to importation to the US, and the only difference from those two later, like the AF and through AM prefixes, is that they don't have a serial number plate. This one had to be imported later on. You can see they put the serial number on the trigger guard, but the very first guns all the way from AA to AE wouldn't have that serial number plate. There's actually some European versions even in the B serial block that also don't have that serial plate. Now, the first major design change, if you will, is still just a Glock 17. This one is an AU prefix, and I've got a couple on the table here to show you. This one does not have a pencil barrel, so the AA prefix all the way to AM prefix had a thinner profile to the barrels. I've got a couple set here side by side. If you can see straight on there, we'll zoom in. Maybe you can tell the one on the left is an AL prefix and the one on the right is a BA prefix. The diameter of the barrel on the BA is larger. That happened around the AN serial prefix, and that was the first major change in internal parts. Zoom back to our normal. So this is an example of Gen 1 17, regular design, AN prefix through probably FF is when they transitioned over to Gen 2. One more quick note. If you have a Glock that is anything other than a 17, 18, 17L, or a 19, it is not going to be a Gen 1. Those are the only designs that they made in the first generation. So models 20 and later at the earliest would be a Gen 2. A lot of people get confused on that, call their model 21 a Gen 1. You can see with the 17L, Glock introduced ports. This was the first example of a factory ported gun made. There's probably only about 500 of those in existence, and they straddle from the Gen 1 to Gen 2 transition. You'll also see, if you've got a true Gen 1 19, it's got this ugly looking grip on the bottom. It was just a prototype gun. They didn't make very many for production, so all of them were cut down from a 17 frame. They put a block in the nose, but the grip itself is this ugly, uneven cut. But that is a true Gen 1 19. So starting with Gen 2, we covered this in the other video. Major change was just adding checkering, front strap, back strap, and the texture on the grip has changed. Now you'll notice this is a model 17. This is actually the Desert Storm commemorative edition. It only has one locking block pin and one trigger housing pin, so it's a 2-pin gun. A lot of people get hung up on that and think 2 pins means Gen 2, 3 pins means Gen 3. We're going to get to that here in a second. That's not necessarily true. Starting with the introduction of the Model 19, which happened as early as the BP prefix in serial production, you'll see that they started marking them with the model number here on the trigger guard. Now this only happened with Model 17 and Model 19, and only on Gen 2 guns. In 1990, maybe 91, they introduced the Model 22 and 23. So this is a first series. If you can read the prefix there, it's an ND prefix, Model 23. But looky there, right away, it has the second locking block pin for a total of 3 pins on the gun. This is the very first series of the Gen 2 production Model 23. It already had 3 pins. So all of the 40 caliber, 10 millimeter, 45 caliber guns had 3 pins all along. Don't get confused on that. That doesn't mean it's a Gen 3. There you go. Video proof. That is a design change, adding the 3rd pin. You also see the trigger guard where that model number used to be is just a blurred dot. Just to further the example, here is a first series. This is an MC prefix, Model 20, and 2 pins in the locking block, 3 pin gun, all the way from the beginning. Just in case people think, well, they just transitioned to 3 pins. No, here is a later, this is an AGL prefix Model 19, and there you go, just a single pin in the locking block. It's a 2 pin gun. So there are 3 pin Gen 2s, there are 2 pin Gen 2s, and here in a second we will get to a 2 pin Gen 3 as well. With the 2nd generation, this is the only version that had these oval ports. So with the first Gen 17L, they had these straight cuts. Those barrels tended to break. When they introduced the Model 24 in 1994, they wanted to experiment with the ports again because this was designed to be a competition gun. So they made these oval-shaped ports. There's 2 different versions of those cuts. I didn't bother getting out the second one. But that is the only ported model that existed from 94 up until 1997. It would have been a Model 24 with those oval cuts. In 97, we're still in Gen 2 production. See the no finger groove frames. But they did start making these C models. This is a 23C. And it had this, what I call snake bite cuts in the ports. So transition from this to this. Curiously, the Model 24 all the way through Gen 3, while they were still porting them, stayed with those oval ports, but all the rest of the guns that came out that were ported had the snake bites. So we will now start the transition over to Gen 3, but before they fully got there, there's a couple of intra-generational models. So these would be considered by the collectors a Gen 2.5. First one up is a Model 21. It has the finger grooves like a Gen 3, has a thumb rest like a Gen 3, but there's no light rail. So that's the first type of transitional model. It's only going to be found in Models 20, 21, and then the ported versions 20C and 21C. The second form of transitional model actually started in 1995 with the release of the 26 and 27 models. These were the subcompact 9mm and 40 calibers. The 33 did come out in 98, but it never existed in this 2.5 version. Only difference between this and later Gen 3 production is you'll see there's no checkering on the finger grooves. So that's considered a Gen 2.5, a transitional frame. Will only be found with models 26 and 27. Alright, here we move. I just wanted to show an example. Here's a later version. This is the first prefix, Model 34. So it came out later to these 3-pin Gen 2s. Here is a 2-pin Gen 3. Single locking block pin, 2 pins on the gun. This is a Gen 3 frame though. And these were the first 9mm. Had the finger grooves, had the thumb rest, had the light rail. Still only had 2 pins. Alright, next they released the compact model 40 and 10mm. Now some people consider these to be a transitional gun because you've got finger grooves and thumb rest, no light rail. They actually did that until like 2013. So I don't really consider that a transitional gun. This is just an early Gen 3. Model 29 or 30 will be found in this configuration, and those went for about 15 years, 14, 15 years before they added the light rail to them. That is one of the transitional guns or different variants that I don't have up on the wall here, so I apologize. I don't have one of everything, just one of most. Alright, and then this is a 2006 20th anniversary edition. By this period, they've added the third pin to the 9mm guns. So you now have transition from a 2-pin, this is an early Gen 3, to a 3-pin, later Gen 3. Now at the same time, they started adding that loaded chamber indicator to the extractor. Right here, the earlier ones, it's a flat piece. I don't know when exactly these came out, but about that same time period when they transitioned to the 3-pin gun, they started releasing these internal lock models. This is actually from the factory. It's a lock built into the back strap, and if you turn it, it engages safeties, makes the gun unfireable. According to the Glock catalogs, they offered the internal lock version in every model that was available from like 2002 to 2010. It was extremely unpopular. Nobody wanted a lock on their gun. So I honestly don't know how many of these even exist. This one's a model 27, but you might find them anywhere from a model 17 up to a 35. Alright, we then have a different type of transitional, moving from Gen 3 to Gen 4. This is the first version of the large frame SF model. So what they did for the SF was they made this a shorter dimension, front to back, try to help people with smaller hands be able to manage the 10mm and the 45s. And this is the version that the company submitted for military trials for the US. So you can see this one has a Picatinny rail. It also has a ambidextrous mag release button on both sides. That turned out to be kind of finicky, so it didn't last very long. There are versions of this same gun, the ambidextrous mag release, but with a regular Glock rail. So that can be counted as one other variant. I just don't have an example of that one. Finally, this is the current production Gen 3. Only difference between this and the earlier 20th anniversary gun I showed you is that the magwell relief is no longer present. Sometimes people get hung up on that, think if it's got a magwell relief it must be a Gen 2, and I don't know when the transition was, probably around early 2010s they filled that in, but all the way from Gen 1 up until the late Gen 3 you've got a magwell relief cutout. So 2009 came around and they were experimenting with different textures. So this is a Gen 3 to 4 transitional gun, also known as the RTF2. It has really small pyramids on the texture here. You also see they did these curved serrations. These were marketed to police. The curves were really unpopular. And this one's actually a ported 22, super rare gun. They probably only got about 200 of those on the market before they transitioned to a straight cut. It's still the RTF2 grip, but straight serrations. This one's a model 19, and these were like a pre-Gen 4 thing. Marketed towards police. A lot of the police complained that the texture was too rough. So starting in 2010, we transitioned to Gen 4 guns. This one is a T or trainer simunition gun. I just didn't have an example of the early Gen 4 other than this. Only real difference here is you'll see they started putting that MBS stamp. That stands for modular backstrap. And the Gen 4 added this groove where you could put in different inserts to make the grip bigger if necessary. Also, transitioning from Gen 3 to Gen 4, they made this front to back strap dimension smaller on all the guns. You can make up for it by putting those back straps in. So the very early Gen 4s will have that MBS stamp on the right side. This is a later Gen 4, 17, and you can see now that oval is there, but they stopped stamping it. So I put that on as a variant, not really a big change, just a change in the markings. This is a standard Gen 4. With Gen 4, it doesn't seem like there have been as many changes, but the next one that did come out was they started offering the modular optics system. So here's a model 34. This was pre-cut from the factory. As optics have become more and more popular, Glock decided to get in on that business, and so you can get one that's pre-cut now. That's a later Gen 4 MOS. I've got a model 48 here, and this is just kind of a placeholder. I don't know that I would consider it different variations, but there is a model 42, 43, 43X, and the 48 that are all kind of in between Gen 4 and Gen 5. So they're not actually marked what generation they are. They do have the texture of the Gen 4, so it's not a Gen 3. They have the lack of finger grooves like a Gen 5, but there are some other changes, like the mag wells aren't flared and stuff like a Gen 5, so it's kind of between Gen 4 and 5. I will mention this one has front serrations cut. That is a version of the Gen 4 that I don't have. They made most of them with or without front serration cuts. Now, one more transition before we actually get to Gen 5. This is an FBI contract gun, 19M, and this was the precursor to Gen 5. Very, very similar design. You can't tell really the difference from the outside other than the M marking. But what I wanted to point out here was the lack of beveling on the frame. So that's one of the differences, early Gen 5 to later Gen 5. Here's a regular Gen 5 gun, FDE 19. You can see no front serrations, and the frame doesn't really line up well. There's a noticeable difference in taper. So they started beveling the front of the slide, didn't bother to work with the frames. That caught them a lot of grief. So here's a later version where the frame is beveled to match, and it's a nice smooth cut. You can also see this is a 19 with the front serrations cut. Different version there. And finally, we have a Gen 5 MOS gun. Now, a lot of these are currently in production. I really expect things to change still. I think there's going to be different versions of Gen 5 come out, maybe even a Gen 6. And since we're still in Gen 3 production, you never know what they might change. I've yet to see an MOS Gen 3, but I think there are some that were. So there you go, guys. 30 different versions of Glock, plus a few I don't have. I am sure there are ones that I have missed, so if you can think of something I didn't cover here, feel free to comment and leave me hate mail. If not, appreciate y'all watching, and definitely go check out the website glockhistory.com. We'll be posting more videos soon enough. Thanks.